Hello everyone, and welcome to one of the first programming tutorials I have done on this channel. Hopefully there will be more to come, but I just thought it would be fun to create a fun little beginner project for Python, and that is the Hangman game. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we need to have our word bank. Now if you would like me to expand on this in a later video and make the Hangman game include more words, we can do that. But today, since this is just a beginner tutorial, we will start with just a simple word bank list with a couple of words. So since this is Python, one of our words will be Python. We can do programming. We could do games, because Hangman is a game. And let's just do one more. Let's just make it program. Something simple. Obviously, these words are a couple letters each, so they'll be harder to guess than just words with one or two letters. So that's good. Okay, now the second thing we need is we need the item in bank. We need the word. So obviously, what we have here now is not what the user is trying to guess. They're trying to guess one of these words in the list. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called item in bank, and we're going to set that equal to random.randint, and then the random integer is between 0 and the length of word bank minus 1. Now this is important, and before we continue, there's an error, and that is just because we have not imported the random library yet. So up top, we can put import random, and that should solve the problem. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're creating a random number, and you'll see why we're creating a random number in just a second. But what this statement is saying is we are assigning item in bank a value between 0 and the length of word bank minus 1. So what does that mean? The length of word bank just takes the length of this list. So if you look here, it will return 1, 2, 3, 4. So actually right now, if we print length of word bank and hit run, it prints 4. As you can see, there's 4 items in the list. Okay, so now that we understand that, we actually have to put a minus 1 here because lists index start at 0. So in reality, this is 0, 1, 2, 3. So by doing this, 4 minus 1 is 3, and it will create a random integer between 0 and 3. So 0, 1, 2, or 3. Now what we can do next is just have the word. This is going to be the word we're going to have the user try and guess. And it's fun to implement a randomness to this game. That way, it's not just one word. We could set word equal to a string, but then the game is really only playable once. So this allows the game to be played multiple times. And the other thing about this is that this is very dynamic code. We're not saying between 0 and 3. We're taking the length of this list, which allows us to add more variables to our list, and the program adjusts to how many items are in our list. Okay, so now we have a word bank. We can, again, it doesn't have to be these words. We can add as many as we want. And then we assign the variable item in bank to a random number that has an index that is within the scope of word bank. And then we have a word, which just sets our word to a random word in this list. So far, pretty simple. Okay, so now let's get into a little bit more of the setup. Now, for now, we're going to use a variable called blank character. It's going to be equal to, this is going to be used as a string throughout. And for now, we're just going to set it as this. Again, it doesn't really matter what this is, but when you start a game of Hangman, you want to have blank lines under the letters that they don't know yet. So that's just formatting. You'll see that in use later. And then we also want to do guessed word equals blank character for I in range, length of word. Now, we'll get into a couple more of the functions, and that will be explained as we go. Obviously, once we see more of the program, that will be easier to explain. However, the guessed word is just the user's input combined to try and figure out what the word is. So I don't know if that makes any sense yet. I'm very bad at explaining things. I don't know why I'm creating this tutorial, but basically what we're saying here is we're creating a list, and for every letter, so for I in range, length of word, so for every letter in the word that we're chosen, so say for example we've chosen the word Python, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We are putting a blank character. So this is just, again, dynamic code that allows us to print blank characters for the number of characters in the word. And again, we'll go over that in a little bit. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with our first function, which is definition get guess. Now, what this is going to do is simply get a guess from the user. So we'll have guess equals input, and then we'll just ask for a guess. And again, you can ask anything in here. You could say, yo, user, what's your guess? Whatever, it does not matter. What this is simply doing is we're taking input from the user in the console and asking for a guess. We're clarifying what we want them to put, and then whatever they put will be assigned to the variable guess. And then we'll simply return guess. And what this does is when we call this function, we can assign it to a variable. So for example, guess equals get guess, and that variable will be assigned to whatever the input is. So technically we don't have to be putting this in a function. We don't really have to be putting anything in a function, but this just helps us organize our code, especially since we're going to be getting a lot of guesses from the user. Okay, so now the next step in this is to create a function that evaluates the user's guess and updates the puzzle. So actually going to put the function above get guess, and we're going to call it def get puzzle. Descriptive naming helps us understand what's going on, and we're just going to take in guess. So this is the variable that is being used here, and we'll assign that argument to this parameter right here. But the guess of the user will be assigned guess, just like these. And then we're going to start with a counter, which is equal to 0. And you'll see why we do that in a second. And then we are going to create a for loop. So we're going to say for letters in word. And what this is saying is it's a for loop. So it's going to repeat code a certain amount of time. And we've actually used these keywords, word, which is actually being used up here, and letters. And letters is not only the amount of times the code is going to loop, but it's assigned to each letter in the list word. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if guessed word counter does not equal, again the exclamation point in equals means does not equal, blank character, then we're going to say counter plus equals 1 and continue. Okay, so what we are saying here, oh, little spelling error. Okay, so what we are saying here is obviously at the start of the game, all of our characters are going to be this blank character. And that's actually why we assigned a variable to it, simply because it allows for more transparency and allows for us to change this value whenever we want. And it's already written in as that variable, so all we have to do is change one little thing at the top. So again, you don't have to do that. We could set this equal to this right here. This is just a simpler, easier way to do it that's more dynamic throughout the code. So what we're saying here is if the guessed word at counter, so when it starts at 0, does not equal this blank counter, we're just going to plus equal 1. So if it's 0, we're just going to add 1 to whatever the value is. So in this case, when it starts, it will add 1, and then we're going to continue. So for example, if the user guessed A in a previous guess, and we already inputted that to the puzzle, then we don't have to check that anymore. We can just skip that because that's part of the puzzle that has already been solved. And so what this continue does is it doesn't break out of the loop, but it skips the rest of the loop. And what we can say here for our next statement is if, which just is short for else if, guess equals letters, we can say guessed word at counter equals, just some formatting right here, guess plus, there we go. So now what this is doing is it's checking the guess. So say I guess the letter, let's just say A again. If the character in that position is blank and the guess equals the letter in that position of word, we're just going to change that blank character that we're using at the beginning to their guess. Now again, we could put guess or letters here. It means the same thing because we're literally saying they're equal right here. And these quotes right here are just to help formatting. You'll see in a little bit when we play the game. But yeah. And then after this loop, we're just going to say counter plus equals 1. And again, this is just going to continue going through the loop. And this counter is just updating the position of where we would update the guess. So hopefully this all makes sense up until this point. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say guessed word string equals quotes dot join guessed word. Okay, so here's what we're doing at this point. So our guessed word is actually a list. So to make it more user-friendly, we want to turn it into a string. And not only is it going to make it more user-friendly, which we're not going to use in this video, but if I do make a part 2 to this, we'll talk about. But it's also easier, in my opinion. Obviously, there's multiple ways of programming. That's the beauty of it. But in my opinion, it is much easier to compare strings than it is lists. So what we're doing is we're turning guessed word, which is a list, into a string. And that is exactly what I'm saying by the name. And this function, .join, turns it into a string. This first part right here is the characters that are going to appear between every item in the list. And I want there to be no space because I want all the letters in guess words to be combined. I don't want spaces between, or it's not really a word. And I'm just going to join the list guess word. All right, awesome. Now, what we can do is we can print guessed word string. And you'll see where this comes in later in the video when we run it. Okay, and now we want to do guessed word string dot replace with this. Okay, now if you notice up here, we actually, for formatting our code, we put these spaces in between just so there's more gaps between the letters and you can kind of see how many characters are left. But when we're wanting to check whether the user has won or not, we don't want all those empty space, because as you can see up here, the words we've chosen don't have all these empty spaces as we put here in the word that we're using. And now we want to check. Now we want to check whether the user has won. So if guessed word string equals word, print, you won. And then we're going to return true. Otherwise, if this is not true, we're going to return false. And now is the final piece, the piece that brings it all together. And we're just going to do a simple while loop at the beginning. So we're going to say while not has won, and we'll see where that variable comes in a second. We'll say guess equals get guess. So we're calling this function get guess and assigning it to guess. And then we're going to say has won equals get puzzle using guess. So what we're saying is we want to get our guess, and then we're going to assign the variable has won, and we're going to run get puzzle with the guess. Now, as you can see here, one thing I forgot to add at the top is has won. And right now that is equal to false. And there you have it. That is Hangman. Let's give it a try. All right. It's asking for our guess. I will guess P. Now, since I am familiar with the words, I am fairly certain I know what it is. And there's an error. Yay! I love errors. Okay, so after a little bit of looking around, I finally figured out the little error I made. So this is working for the most part. There's just one thing I forgot to include, and that's just an error with this replace function. So instead of just replacing these spaces with and changing them to empty spaces within this string, we have to do that, but we also have to set the string equal to it. And with that, it should work. So let's go ahead and give it a run. I'll pull up the console here, and it's asking us to guess. Okay, there's a P in it. O-G-A-M. And obviously, I know the words in the list, and you can change those words for it to be as many or as little as you want. But there we have it. It is saying that we won, which is good, and the program stops. Now, there is one more thing I would like to add before we go today, and that is the fact that on your first guess, it does not display how many spaces there are in the word, so you don't really know how big the word is. And that's not really too big of a deal. But before we start the while loop, just so it's helpful for the user, we can add this print statement. And this just prints the guessed word before the game starts. Now, you may be wondering, well, isn't this going to change when it's updated? And the answer is yes, but we're only calling this once until we go into the while loop. So the first time it prints it, and the only time it prints it, it will just be the blank characters. So if we run it again and pull up the screen, now it should show us before we begin. Awesome. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful. Let me know if there are any Python programming tutorials that you would like to see. Thanks for watching.